بسم الله بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله ومن صحبه ومن والاه وبعد. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. So we're just going to reconvene for a few moments I'm going to go through a few other remaining points. I'm not going to go through my other 8 pages of notes. Just going to go through a few other quick points, maybe a quick summary, and then a little bit of Q&A for those here and those online. So I was talking about, before we broke, just, using some ideas or things that are represented in the movie Inception to get us to think about the enterprise of creating a Muslim culture and helping it to illustrate, some some prophetic qualities, some sort of Quranic motifs, and to also help to illustrate to us some of the difficulties that we may face in trying to actually carry this out. And as I said, before we left off, one of the nature of the dunya is that it's unstable, and that's one of the things that we see in the movie is that the dream world is inherently unstable. So you have to direct your energies, and that's what the characters in the movie do. The characters don't really direct their energies towards trying to make an unstable world stable. They just try to accomplish their goal, right? And then move on. So that's what we should, we have to focus on our goals. One of the other interesting aspects of the movie is that the character Fisher, who is the person they're trying to essentially, kind of kidnap and abduct and trying to plant this idea in his mind, is that what makes their task hard is that he's actually been given some training before against this type of I guess you could call it, attack of having somebody go into your mind and your dreams and your subconscious. Is that he's had his mind trained against this, so that he knows how to tell when somebody's putting him on. And I think that for our youth, in the way that they deal with this world, right, in the way that they deal with this dunya, again, in the context of trying to manufacture an authentic and bona fide Muslim culture, part of that will be giving them the skills to differentiate truth from falsehood, and that's an important part of building a culture. Is, again, culture is great. It has that capacity to help, helps you make decisions. It helps to inform you. It makes the burden of living much easier because it helps to you essentially conduct your life in a more fluid way. And yet, if you're not careful, it can kind of get out of control. So we need to make sure that, when it comes to our religious education, is that we're not just telling them the answers, but we also give them the capacity to answer the questions on their own as well. So just, again, you look at how we do primary school education. When children are very small, you tend to at first just kind of give them the answers to things so that they build up a vocabulary so that they can, but as their minds develop, it's really not sufficient just to give people answers anymore, but you begin to give them the tool set by which they can answer questions. So that's one thing that you see in the movie, and that's one thing that's, again, I think important for us to consider. The other thing is, as we talk about trying to build building a culture, like I said, we're not going to be stamping out little widgets of Muslim culture one at a time. That would be too cumbersome. So to a great degree, and I know this may be unsettling for people, but part of my task here this weekend is to unsettle you. So part of this will actually just be taking a lot of the prefabbed American culture and trying to ascribe different levels of religiosity to it, either of what we can take from it, and hopefully we'll be able to take a large amount, and obviously there will be parts that we won't be able to take. So part of this process is something similar to where in the movie, in the second level of the dream, so they're now, at this point in the movie, they're a dream within a dream, and Leonardo DiCaprio's character tells Fisher, he's like, he actually hands him a gun because they're kind of like tricking him into breaking into his own subconscious. And he hands him the gun and says, I need you to work with me. Right? So the gun here is not the important part. It's just a tool. It's not about handing people guns. But the point is, Leonardo DiCaprio's character, who's the lead character, once again, is willing to work with other people to accomplish a task and a goal. And we must come to the swift conclusion that this process of living a dignified existence in America, this process of creating an authentic Muslim culture that's healthy, that is authentically Muslim but also authentically American, will not be accomplished only by Muslims themselves. It will have to be negotiated on some level with non-Muslims, in the same way that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ had to negotiate treaties, had to negotiate contracts with the Quraysh, with non-Muslims, in order that he could actually accomplish his goal as Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So in the same way, Dom Cobb, the character in the movie, who is Leonardo DiCaprio's character, has to rely upon Fisher's character, who is essentially, he's not really one of them, but he brings them into his group. So in the same way, like there will have to be some mutual cooperation between Muslims and non-Muslims in this society, again, given the fact that we're probably barely a percentile of the population. So that's just something that we need to be aware of. We can't avoid it, and we need to have a game plan of how to do that in a very pragmatic way, right? We can't, not giving over into extremes of one or the other. We can't become isolationist. There's no way to be isolated here. I mean, we're surrounded by non-Muslims. There's no, isolationism simply will not work. And at the same time, just diving into a pool that you don't know whether it has water in it or not, or whether how deep it is, or there's sharks in it or whatnot. So it has to be a pragmatic engagement of this. And that, this process is going to take many, many years to do. This is not going to be an overnight phenomenon. So at one point in the movie, when Dom Cobb, Leonardo DiCaprio's character, is training Ariadne, who's this young girl that's going to work as the architect for their dream world. Like, he's bringing her on the team. Her job is to build the dream world. And also as he works with Fisher, as he tries to bring Fisher into his team, and they're trying to get him to remember the number to the combination to the safe. He's really struggling, and he's like, I can't seem to remember these things. And he said, yes, he's like, why is it so hard to remember? He said, it's like trying to remember a dream after you've woken up. It takes years of experience, right? And we've all had this experience. You wake up from a dream, sometimes like, oh man, I had this amazing dream, and then you want to maybe write it down or remember it, and the harder that you try, it's like it just begins to kind of slip away from you. And that, it may take years of us to eventually get a really good grip on this. We have to start. We need to start kind of ASAP. But we shouldn't also be deluded by the fact that this is, okay, we're just going to create this culture overnight. It's not going to happen immediately, but at the same time, if we don't ever start, then it's never going to happen. The other interesting thing is the relationship between Leonardo DiCaprio's character and Ken Watanabe's character, who is the Japanese businessman who has hired them to infiltrate this guy's mind. And again, the character's name is Saito. He is motivated again by these very sort of like worldly means. He wants to break up the monopoly of this energy company so that he can compete, because he feels like this guy has this monopoly. And yet, as he gets pulled into the story, so again, think about this in the way of how the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, pulled people into the story. They became Muslim. They became with the Muslims. They may have initially joined for very worldly matters, but by the end of the story, they're in it specifically because of La ilaha illallah and Muhammad Rasulullah. So the nature of the relationship between Leonardo DiCaprio and Ken Watanabe's character is that initially he hires Leonardo DiCaprio, but as he becomes involved in the story, and because he's a good person, it becomes very apparent, even though he's motivated by these worldly matters, Saito's character ultimately is seen as a man of dignity, a man of principle. And one of the themes that repeats in the movie is that, he becomes lost. Matter of fact, Saito's character, because he gets shot, he descends into this sort of limbo world. And then, essentially, Leonardo DiCaprio's character has to go after him deeper down into the world to kind of save him and pull him back to reality. And they're committed to one another, even as he's dying in the dream world. Saito says to Dom Cobb, he's like, don't worry, I'll fulfill my bargain. Even if you fail, right, even if you're not able to succeed in creating Inception, I'll still uphold my end of the bargain, even as he's dying. And Dom Cobb is like, well, if you die here, you won't even remember that we had an agreement. But it just shows that, their relationship together was one based on mutual respect and the fact that they were people of principle. So again, it's very important for us to understand that, we're not only trying to build this culture for the community that is here, we're trying to also build it for the community to come. Part of that community to come is, of course, our children and our grandchildren. But again, I'm somebody that 30 years ago was not part of the Muslim community because I wasn't Muslim yet. So we need to also think that we're building this culture, we're building this for the community to come, and we never know who will be blessed, to kind of deal with. So in the same way that, initially, Khalid ibn al-Walid was what? An enemy of the Muslims. He fought against the Muslims. Then became to be known as literally the champion of the Muslims. So, you're always, by sticking to your principles, right, that you will always be primed and prepped and prepared to deal with whatever good comes along. So, because the Prophet ﷺ was, the ultimate example, the exemplar of character, yes, initially when he and Khalid met, they were his adversaries. But towards the end of his life, he was, like the champion in many ways of the Prophet ﷺ. So that gives us some don't be, don't lose hope in what you see in front of you today. And that's why I said again, stay hopeful. Keep make dua, and that don't be afraid to dream, a little bit bigger. That's something just to kind of keep in mind. So these are some of the main points that I wanted to bring up. There was a great quote too that Eames makes in the movie Tom Hardy's character, where he said, speaking to Saito, he said, there's no room for tourists on this job. And I think that's a great quote in the way of that, particularly for this enterprise of trying to cement and indigenize Islam in America. There is no room for tourists in that job. That we need people that are committed to this for the long haul. So if you're a person that's a tourist, by all means, come in, have fun, enjoy the scenery, but we don't need people who are not committed to this to come in and to detract from it. It should also be kind of like a cautionary word to those people that want to get involved, because maybe they have kind of like a activist spirit or something. Those things are cool, but realize that we're also, we're playing for keeps. This is not a joke. This is not a game, and therefore, again, there's no room for tourists, on this job. So this this movie actually has a lot of really interesting and and great quotes in it. So so that there was a few other points, but that's mainly it. I really I found this movie to be kind of really inspirational and illustrative of kind of what we're doing, or even some things from the prophetic period and whatnot. And again, it's everybody's personal discretion of whether you should watch the movie. I'm just saying it's a movie that, by and large, is it doesn't have sex and gratuitous sex or excessive vulgar language. I mean, any child that wants to watch this movie obviously must obtain their parents' permission to do so, and every parent has to make a judgment call of whether they want their child to watch it or not. I have found them. I personally don't see any major issue with the movie, but again, I'm not telling people this is what they have to do. And somebody watches it and feels that it's not appropriate, then alhamdulillah, that's a perfectly valid objection. So just to summarize, I mean, we basically been talking about custom and culture. We've been talking about both our ability to adopt culture, as well as our ability to create it. So again, like a sort of push-pull system, so that it's both passive and active. And we read from Dr. Qauta's book that, again, is mainly a book on mu'amalat, or Islamic financial transactions, but he laid out, again, 4 really important points. I'll just summarize again. The first of them being حاجة الفقيه إلى العرف في فهم نصوص الشريعة نفسها, that there is the necessity of the faqih as it relates to culture in the comprehension of classical Islamic texts relating to the Sharia in and of themselves. That's one of the first obligations to engage in this activity. The second is the necessity for the faqih as it relates to custom, to urf, to be cognizant of those other injunctions that have been laid down in the canon of Islamic law and fiqh. حاجة الفقيه إلى العرف حالة عمله هنا مع المدونات والكتب الفقهية. The third one was the necessity for the faqih as it relates to culture in the comprehension of the situation on the ground, and also into being cognizant of what is the goal, making sure that the goal of whatever this engagement of either condoning or condemning culture, that the goal of it is made manifest, and that it should be done on a case-by-case basis, through deduction. حاجة الفقيه إلى العرف لفهم الواقع وتحقيق المناطق وتنزيل الأحكام على الحوادث. And then the fourth point, to summarize, was the necessity for the faqih as it relates to culture in comprehending the nature of the people. حاجة الفقيه إلى العرف لمعرفة الناس. So these are the 4 major points that we used as a sort of technical construct, and then we talked about it through the lens of the movie Inception. So jazakumullahu khairan. Inshallah, we'll open up if anybody has any questions. I mean, that's a good question. I mean, where how do we start? Where do we go from here? Even though it will take some time to do so, is I mean, I think that we need to encourage our youth to engage in the arts. I mean, I just think the arts in many different forms have shown to be beneficial for human development. Writing, other types of art forms. I was talking with Imam Suhaib Webb, and I've had this idea of maybe doing a camp, like a summer camp, that would be called essentially like prophetic masterpiece theater. So as a kid, I grew up watching like masterpiece theater, right? So I like drama and acting, and they've shown even as a kid. I remember going, in elementary school, and you would perform plays, and it was great because it's a way to inject yourself as a kid into a narrative that you get to act it out. And I've always said that there's so many great stories from the biography of the Prophet ﷺ or through other stories in the Quran that could be translated into a dramatic format that kids could act out. It's sad. I've been Muslim now for 22 years, and the last Muslim movie that came out was like The Message, made back in somebody can Google it. How many years ago? We haven't really had like a decent movie. I know that there are things produced in the Arabic-speaking world, but I'm saying for us in America, right? Like there's The Message and there's A Lion of the Desert. Like that's it. And therefore, the dramatic arts are a great way for kids to learn, to become part of the story, to really feel, So I think that's possibly one way. So we'll need to encourage our kids to and then people in the community, leaders. Like we need leadership in the community that will obviously go beyond just the fiqh of ibadat, right? So we need Muslim playwrights. We need Muslim poets. We need Muslim authors. So just I think a healthy engagement of the arts, because most kids like engaging in the arts, and I think that would be a healthy way to start. I'm not being I'm not saying it's like a panacea that's going to fix everything, but it's certainly a good foothold to maybe start in. Right, right. So the question is, do we have a process of obtaining consensus so that if we go through this procedure of trying to sift through sift out the bad from the good of culture, how do we move forward? One, I think this is definitely going to call for a new breed and a new generation of Muslim leadership that sees it not as like, I got to deal with this culture thing, but I want to, right? So, people who are grounded in Quran, in usul, in fiqh, that see it, that it is, that they must engage. That matter of fact, that's the only reason. Like the whole purpose to become like a religious leader, to go and study fiqh, like the only purpose to go and learn this stuff is so that I can deal with my reality. So I think that we have to shift the burden on our mental construct from like, I got to deal with it, to I want to deal with it, and in fact there is nothing else to deal with. We need to destigmatize, we need to destigmatize American culture, and we need to destigmatize religion dealing with American culture. For some people, I think, quite honest, just to like for some religious leaders of a certain age that have come from a certain type of background, they may not be able to rearrange their mental furniture enough to accommodate that. And I'm not saying those people may not have a place in our community, but they certainly, again, there's no room for tourists. My thing is, if you're not willing to intimately engage and actively engage America as a Muslim leader, especially rooted in the tradition of Islam, then you're a tourist. Therefore, there's no room for tourists on this job. We need people that are in this, that are motivated, and again, that's going to probably be, And I see it changing. I mean, the younger, guys and girls now that are growing up and studying Islam, systematically, you see it that they are actually, they're like, yeah, I want to get into this. So there's, we just need to give them, I think, and I say we as the rank and file Muslims need to give them the green light of go ahead. Like, we support you in this endeavor. Because again, what's the alternative? Right? Go back to the status quo of, people apostating because they just feel like they can't really function as a Muslim. That doesn't sound like a really good alternative. If that answers your question. We do have a crisis of authority. Right. Sure. Right. Right. So I mean, yeah, exactly. I mean, one of the things that you illustrate is it's great to talk about the arts and have Muslim poets and filmmakers and this or that. But if the establishment of religious leadership doesn't sign off on them, then we're essentially going nowhere. Which is why, for whatever reason, like I said, I'm sitting in this chair not because I came up here and sat, but you guys basically put me in this chair. Right? I mean, you flew me out here, you put me. So the Muslim community, for whatever reason, has decided to put me in a position of leadership. Not that I have total authority, but I obviously have some modicum of religious authority. So I have seen, it that in terms of myself, I have an obligation then to engage that artistic community. That's one of the reasons why I made the video about the Muslim hipsters, to try to provide a more balanced critique against it. That one, my overall arching thing was like, hooray, I'm glad Muslims made a little short film. That's cool, right? But I also provided a balanced critique of like, hey, you know what? Let's just not take the cheap way out and imitate the non-believers by playing vulgar music. Let's take the creative path, let's take the inspired path, let's take the prophetic path, right, and do it with morality. So that's one of the reasons why I did it, was to actually try to show solidarity with those Muslims that, hey, as a Muslim leader, and I'm sure people are like, this dude's no scholar, he's not, like, okay, whatever, but for whatever small bit of leadership or authority I have, I made it very clear that I supported them. And I think you'll find that there are other imams that are like this now that are doing that. And in fact, part of my job is to try to now engage as many other imams and leaders to say, look, we need to support them. The only way that we will help to actually ensure that their endeavors meet a sort of quality standard of morality is if we are with them in the trenches. We've got to come out of the seminaries, we've got to come out of the books, and we have to be with the people, right? And that's very much the prophetic tradition. The Prophet ﷺ was just not sitting in his house writing treaties and sending edicts and no, he was in the trenches. I mean, that's how he got his tooth knocked out in one of the battles, because he was with the people in reality, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So, again, there's no room for tourists on this job. If you don't want to get your hands dirty, then this isn't Disneyland tourism. This is like, this is the kind of tourism where you do like Survivor. You're going to get dirty. So you need to be very much aware of this. So I think the onus at this point is on the leadership to cooperate with one another, which means that we will have to put aside our differences. And we're going to have them. We're not going to get away from difference, right? The Quran says, وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ, grab a hold firmly onto the rope of Allah. وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا. It says, and don't break up into groups. It doesn't say, وَلَا تَخْتَخْفِلُوا. It doesn't say, don't differ. It just says, don't break up. We're going to have differences. That's a presupposition of being a Muslim, is you're going to have some differences with some other Muslims. The presupposition is that as an imam or as a leader, I'm going to have differences with other imams and other leaders. But that is not an acquittal to differ. That doesn't give you the right to break up and go form. No, I got to be with you, even though I may have my differences. So that's, I think, we need to have a greater degree of maturity and responsibility from people in leadership to understand, man, these stakes are really high. You know, I mean, one of my mentors, Dr. Jackson, said, we got like 3, 4, 5 decades, man, to get this thing together and get it right. Otherwise, things may go in a very unfavorable direction. So, greater degree of outreach on the part of leaders to other leaders. Because in my own experience, this is as an example, like me working with Imam Suhaib Webb, I see how energized the youth are just to see Imam Suhaib and I. They're like, wow, like they do stuff together with their friends. They tell jokes on Twitter with one another and whatnot. And some people are like, man, these guys are clowns. But you know what? When we do programs with Muslims, they, in many ways, vibe off of the love that he and I have one for one another, and the energy and the friendship, and it kind of creates a little bit of crackle, and that becomes infectious with the other people. So just by us doing that shows that, man, come together. And don't think for a minute, even as good friends as Imam Suhaib and I are, I'm sure if you really got down to it, there's got to be some differences between the two of us. I mean, yeah, he's Maliki and I'm Maliki and whatnot, but I'm sure if you get down to it, we are going to have some differences. I mean, he's from Oklahoma and I'm from Detroit. There's got to be some differences, right? So, but what we have tried to do in a very obvious way is to demonstrate we support and love one another for the sake of Allah and for the sake of our community. And we hope that other community leaders will get on board with that, inshallah. Sure. They are, and I'll make them both available, inshallah. So, Jazakum Allahu khairan. Appreciate having me out, and inshallah, whatever was of benefit was from Allah. Any mistakes I made are against me, and I ask Allah for forgiveness and for your afina. ربنا اغفر لنا ذنوبنا وارحمنا وعافنا واعف عنا والصلاة والسلام على النبي الكريم وعلى آله وأزواجه وأنصاره وذريته أجمعين سلم تسليما كثيرا. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته.